Well, guys, we are now officially done with the Bates Motel part of the story, and now moving very slowly into the Psycho part of the story, and it just keeps getting creepier, starting with this episode. Hey guys, come remember the season finale of Bates Motel, Season 4, Episode 10, Norman, and I was definitely really looking forward to this episode, probably more than any episode of Bates Motel ever, mainly because this is a really hard episode to come back from, because obviously last week's episode we had the death of Norma and Norman. That's been our main focus of the show, and without Norma, how's the show going to go on? That's really what I was interested in seeing, is really what they were going to do now that Norma's gone, now that it seemed like Dylan was gone, and I could not have asked for a more perfect, I think, introduction to what the final season's really going to be. While I think last week's episode was the true season finale, this was more of what next season is going to be. How is the rest of the show going to be? That is exactly what this episode was, which was dark, it was very surreal, and it pretty much sets up the psycho part of Norman. Norman's officially gone psycho, and we totally see that here. Some really crazy stuff in this episode. I think they showed very well here where we're headed for next season, but let's just get into this episode. I have a lot to say about this episode. Very well done. Of course, Freddie Highmore was incredible. You guys expect me to say that, but there's a lot to say about this episode. I will talk, of course, I'm going to talk about everything that happened in this episode, and I will give my thoughts on the season overall. So, right away, I mean, a lot of people were wondering if Norma was actually dead, and I was thinking they were going to do a cop-out, and she wasn't actually dead, but right away we see she's in a morgue, and Norman, we see, he really is kind of in this place where he's believing that his mother is still alive. We see the paramedics arrive, take Norman away, and he's slipping in and out of a dream of a much happier, younger Norman, and, younger Norma, her loving son, and it's a really nice scene. I did like the way that that was done, but the craziest part, of course, is that we know that Norma's actually dead, but the best part of this episode is that Norman doesn't actually think she's dead. We'll get into that. But then we see Romero. He's being questioned by a woman named Detective Chambers, who becomes a huge part of this episode. And let me just tell you, every single person that came up to Norman in this episode, I'm like, they're dead. They're gonna die. They're gonna die. I was like freaking out that they were gonna die. And she asks if he's seen the notes, and Romero's confused until he reads the letter that Norma wrote along with the ring she's left, which is a coincidental perfect suicide note that clearly Norman read so he can make it look like a suicide. But Romero is much smarter than this. He knows that Norma's not actually suicidal, and he still knows that Norman's somewhat insane, and he knows that Norma would never just abruptly leave like that, which we do know she wrote that note to Romero and everything, but it was not a suicidal note. That was not what Norma was planning on doing. We do know that Norma was going to end things with Romero, but she wasn't planning on dying. That was all Norman's plan. So at the hospital, Norman is trying to prove his acceptance of Norma's death, really to just, I think prove to himself that she's actually dead, because the entire episode you can tell that Norman's kind of in denial. He's got no one to call or take him home, and it's a really fascinating episode because Norman's all alone. He no longer has that mother to rely on or that shoulder to cry on. He doesn't have any of that stuff. We can see that Norman is very well taking care of himself. Romero shows up anyway, and you can just see that he is the last person that Norman wants to see, and the tension between these two was very well played in this episode. I really love that. Some of the best stuff in this episode was the tension between these two. He lashes out. He's blaming him for Norman's death, telling him that he tried to warn him, and he then tells Romero that he doesn't want to see him anywhere, and that's when Romero completely loses it, and he literally pushes Norman against the wall, basically saying that he knows that Norma's dead and that Norman's responsible, and I love that he says that, look, you're responsible and everything, but it doesn't really help much at all, and we can see, and it's a very interesting relationship because you think Norman has this power over Romero. What I love about this episode is that Norman has no power over Romero whatsoever. Romero is completely okay with kicking Norman's ass, beating him down, pushing him against the wall. I mean, even what he does later, which we definitely need to talk about because that scene was crazy, I think they both really catered to, especially Nestor Carbonell, particularly him. This was an incredible episode from him. I mean, Freddie Highmore, he's been killing it all season, but Nestor Carbonell really did that inner rage perfectly because Nestor Carbonell really is the only one that sees that Norman is crazy and that Norman is unstable and that Norman is responsible for this death. He doesn't know what capacity, but he does know that Norman's not well, and that ever since Norman got back from that hospital, he has not been well, and ever since then, he's trying to prove that Norman is responsible for this. For whatever reason, no one seems to prove because Norman is just very good at tricking people. And I can understand people say, oh, Norman is, no one's believing him, but that's how it's always been. Norman's just very good at tricking people like that, and it's very good. Very good scene. I really love seeing that, and I thought that was really well done, and I definitely really enjoyed that. And as good as Freddie Highmore is, I don't think Nestor Carbonell gets the credit he deserves. All season, he has been killing it, particularly this episode, I really love because he is on exactly the same level as Norman. He knows everything that Norman's about to do. He knows exactly, he is exactly into Norman's head, and he knows exactly that Norman is pretty much responsible for this entire thing. There is no denial for him. There is no denying that Norman is responsible. There is no suspecting anyone else. He knows that Norman's the one that did it, and he just won't admit it, which is really crazy, and I love the way that was done. The interplay between those two, such intense stuff. Literally, basically every scene these two are in, it's very hard to watch, and I really did like seeing that. And we really are starting to see this newer side of Norman that's even creepier than what we've seen. It's much more closer to the original, I believe Anthony Powell was his name. I should know this, guys, but I just can't think of his name right now. Who played Norman originally? Let me check. I think his name was Anthony Powell. Anthony Perkins. Okay, Anthony Perkins. Freddie Highmore is channeling his inner Anthony Perkins. Definitely, he did a very good job in this episode, I have to say, because you really do see that Norman just has this really unhealthy relationship with his mother, to the point where he feels his entire episode that she's going to come back, perfectly shown in this next scene. When he comes home, he's calling out for Norma, who of course, isn't there, and he eats by himself, which is a plate set for Norma, and goes to her room, sleeps alone, pretending that she's there, and when he wakes up, he throws all his meds away before being interrupted by a phone call from Mr. Wilcox, and it's this fantastic scene because you can just see that Norman feels that Norma's going to come back and that she's not actually dead and that she's only pretending to be dead. It's incredible stuff. We see he's interrupted from this guy, Mr. Wilcox, who is a funeral home director, and he wants to speak to Romero about arrangements, but Norman's saying no. He was only married to her for 2 weeks, and there's nothing, that Romero has to do with anything, and Norman will take care of it. What I also love that first scene, Romero, I forgot to say, is that I think those police are suspecting that Romero could be partially responsible for this. They don't really know how this all happened. It's a sudden thing, and basically Norman's saying that no, I'm going to take care of this, and Romero meanwhile goes to the morgue, and they're reluctant to let him see his wife because they were only married for 2 weeks, but eventually Romero does get his way, and he's going to make sure he gets his way, and he gets one last moment with her where he kisses her, puts the wedding ring back onto her finger, and it's a really great closure to this relationship because it was one of the big parts of this season. I mean, I think if anything, the head relation of the season was not Norman and Norma, but Norma and Romero. These two were closer than ever, and they became so much more than we have seen these other past seasons. We've had hints in the first 3 seasons, but this really was where we got to see those two actually together. The difference is that Romero doesn't die. I thought Romero is set for death. He's gonna die, and I'm just gonna say right now, he does not die in this episode, which I thought was actually really well done because that's what I suspected would happen, and he didn't die, and I was actually very happy that he didn't because it makes this episode a lot more interesting, the fact that he didn't die. And he kisses her, puts the wedding ring back on her finger, and it's really sad because Romero still loves her, and that's one of the things I think they showed so well here, is that Romero still loves her, and that's really all it is. This is just a man trying to get to the woman he loves and try to prove that the woman he loves would not kill herself because she loved him just as much, but she loved Norman just as much as well, and because of her love for her son, that always took principle over any other relationship, and we've known this since the first episode of the show. I mean, we started out the show with Norma killing her husband and everything, and well, we found eventually that was Norman that did that, but we see Norman is taking his rage out on a piece of property, and Detective Chambers arrives, and the second she's there, I'm like, she's gonna die, you're gonna die, and I was freaking out because I really just thought Norman was gonna take his anger out on someone, just kill them, and Norman tells his version of the story, how Norma was upset the night that she went to bed, and then starts talking about Romero and everything, and he talks about Norma protectively, and bad mouths his stepfather, makes Romero look like this terrible person, using everything from their short marriage to his drug trade past, and you can tell that Norman is not just out to, basically show Romero this terrible person, he is out to ruin Romero completely. Like, he is not going to kill Romero, but he is going to ruin Romero, and basically ruin his entire reputation to prove that he only married Norma so he could have her to herself, and that is not at all why they got married. They got married because it was a legal thing, and get Norman locked up, and he says he loved his mother more than anything else in the world, but she did not have stellar taste in men, he declares. And of course, this isn't taken seriously because Norman is picking out Norma's funeral dress and is in distress, which is sad. But again, the way this is done, it's really creepy. Again, I think Freddie Highmore really understood when to be creepy, when to not be, and I really love the way that that was done. Again, like a lot of Norman believes, like I said, throughout this entire episode, Norman believes that Norma is going to wake up. He has that intellect and he has that sense that she's going to wake up, which we know of course she's not, but he's thinking that she is. So he finally goes to that funeral home, which we didn't actually know if he was going to do, because I didn't know if Norma's actually going to face, hey, your mom's dead, you need to give her a funeral. He finally goes to that funeral home though with Wilcox and his son, and the way he's able to seem completely innocent to everyone, I don't know how Norman does it, but he's able to do it for everyone. He's able to do it to not just Detective Chambers, but also Wilcox. They don't suspect anything. And he says that he knows what embalming is because taxidermy and everything, and he asks to see her and is allowed on the promise he won't get upset. They basically talk to him about procedures, like, how does he want to see his mother die and everything like that, which of course he doesn't want to really talk about because obviously his mother's dead, which he caused, but again, he's trying to make it seem like he's the innocent one and that Romero's this terrible person because again, he is out to ruin Romero completely. But we see that Norman, he touches his mother tenderly, he takes off Romero's ring, and it just is really creepy, honestly, just knowing and he keeps saying to her, you can wake up now, you can wake up now. It's incredible the way this is done, but it never comes across as just weird. It comes across as that's exactly something that Norman would do. Norman is sick in the head, and this episode further explains that Norman is sick in the head, and I really love the way that was done. But we can see that Norman's smooth, but he's not that smooth, and you can clearly see that someone did probably see Norman take that wedding ring off. I mean, definitely you can see that. So Romero then visits the man who fixed the furnace for Norma, because that's really what got them into this mess, is the whole furnace situation, who also told her that it was leaking, and Romero wants to know if Norman was there when he told her that, and I love the way that Romero is basically secretly investigating Norm, because he knows that something's off about this. He knows, one, that Norma wouldn't kill herself. He knows, two, that Norman is not well. Something with that does not go together. The fact that Norma would not kill herself, the fact that she loved Romero, something there just doesn't fit. And Romero, I don't think knows how Norman killed her, but I do think he thinks that Norm's responsible. And Romero wants to know if Norm was there when he told her that, and he can't seem to remember until Romero starts assaulting him, and then he admits it's possible he could have heard, which, again, it's crazy, but the lengths that Romero goes to get this information, you can tell he doesn't care what he has to do. He's going to get that information for the woman that he loves and the woman that died, and he doesn't care how he's going to do it. He will assault people. He will get in their way, and he's not showing any mercy, which is crazy to see, but I feel like this is the Romero that's been coming out. I mean, we've known this Romero has always been there. I mean, he killed Bob Paris, which he finally does kind of get punishment for that. We'll get to that, but then he admits it's possible that he could have heard it, and a distraught Norman then comes home. He hears the piano playing, runs up the stairs excitedly, but there's no Norma and no piano, just a dark and empty house. It's really a sad scene because, again, he knows that Norma's no longer going to play that piano and that she's never going to be there. And then we get what probably might be the most tragic scene in this episode. I mean, there were some really tragic scenes here, but I think Dylan really has the most tragic because from the looks of it, it seemed like Dylan was gone completely, but he was only gone from Norma's life. Dylan really in this scene is just trying to tell Norman that, look, you and I can still have a relationship. He offers condolences, telling his brother he's there if he needs him, and really he's just trying to be that great brother. But it's clear that Norman doesn't care. He's actually very affected by Dylan's words, you can tell. And I love seeing that he is affected, but I think Norman deep down actually wants Dylan to have his own life. He says that, Dylan says, that he doubts she'll ever reach out to him, and he's now going to spend the next few months, which is, the crazy thing about this is that Dylan does not know that Norma is dead, and that really is the saddest part about this, is that Dylan doesn't know his mother is dead, the fact that his mother's dead, the fact that Norman is responsible, he just knows that things are really rough between Norma and Norman, and he doesn't really know what's going on there, which I'm sure is going to get resolved eventually, and really does show that Dylan is still going to have something to do in Season 5, which I'm glad about because Max Theriot has done a great job as Dylan, but what Norman tells him, you can see that Norman actually does care about his brother, which is crazy. I didn't actually think that Norman cared about anyone but Norma, and you can see here that he actually does care. He tells his brother that they shouldn't talk anymore, effectively cutting off the relationship. But I think the reason that he did this mainly was because he wants Dylan to get to have his own life and let Dylan be free, because I think Norman knows that he is partially crazy. I don't think he knows the extent of how crazy he is, but I think he knows that he's not stable and he's not well, and he doesn't want Dylan to have to find out what he did. Number one, there's that, but also the fact that Dylan is having this great life with Emma. He can see that they've kind of cut off themselves, and he needs to continue doing that, and he leaves Dylan where he started at the beginning of the series, with Norma dead to him, and it's interesting because Dylan started out this way, with calling, of course, his mother Norma and everything, and not really being there, and that's exactly where he ends the series, which honestly makes sense where he ends the series in season 5, but I do think he's not going to stop. I do think he's going to try to have the relation with his brother, because you can see the look on Dylan's face. He's not done. He's going to keep trying, and I do think that Dylan is going to do whatever he can to try to figure out what's going on with Norman, because I think he knows that Norman definitely is hiding something. He doesn't know what, and I don't think he knows the extent where Norman is hiding, but I definitely think that definitely is going to happen. I do kind of like, though, how Dylan kind of stopped having a plot this season. If you remember, he started this whole season with that whole thing with Emma, and how he wanted to get her closer to Audrey, and then, of course, Norman killed Audrey and everything, and then we had the whole thing with Dylan possibly working with Emma's father. We never really touched upon that, though, because most of the season focused on Norman and Norma and Romero. That was our main focus. Dylan was kind of living his own life with Emma. We really didn't need to see it anymore, and I feel like this is still showing that. Notice Emma wasn't even in this episode, which I'm sure we're going to see her again before the show's over. I don't know when, but I'm sure we're going to see her again. I don't think she's going to be as big as a part of the show, but I do think we're going to see Dylan and Emma next season. I just don't know when. We then see that Norman pretty much is just isolating himself, and then we get to Norma's funeral, which is probably as tragic as you can imagine, especially Norma's speech, because Norman does give his speech alone to a mostly empty room we see, though he loses it, because he talks about how, Norma was this perfect person, and how, there was really nothing wrong with her, and how she always had this innocence to her, and he says that, he's really upset for her for leaving him, and it caused the priest to be concerned, and he's saying that, he's fine and everything, but then Romero shows up, and this is really when the chaos sets in, because Norma, already volatile, tells him he needs to leave. Norman is already causing problems and already showing that he clearly is unstable, and that's just as bad, but then he gives him back the ring that he took from Norma, and this is when Romero just sets off. I mean, you knew Romero had this rage this whole time, and Romero was set on, making sure that Norman is, that people see that Norman is not stable. But finally we see these two have a full-on fight in the church. Romero doesn't even care he's in the church, which I love seeing, and Norman would be, it's just crazy to see the lengths of what he does, and again, to anyone else, Norman is a kid, Romero's the adult in the situation, and that's why everyone is really getting mad at Romero and not Norman, because they see Norman as just someone that's grieving, while Romero was married to Norma for 2 weeks, and they don't really understand what's going on with Norman, and that's really why I think Norman's so good at this, because Norman plays himself off as very innocent, and Norman, you can see, will probably walk away from this. Romero goes to the office, he takes out a gun with the intent to kill Norman. I honestly think he was planning on killing Norman, and we know he's obviously not going to kill Norman, but that's what he plans on doing. He takes that gun, I'm like, he's going to kill Norman. That's what he's going to do, and I was thinking, Romero's a goner. Norman's going to kill him that season. That's exactly what I thought was going to happen, but before he can get anywhere, he's then cornered, he's charged for perjury, and he's now going to jail. So I think this is how we get Romero off the show. I don't know if we're going to see him again next season, but okay, now he's charged for perjury, which I think is good for 2 reasons. One, he never confessed to Bob Paris's murder. That is not the reason why he's charged for perjury. It's because of the fact that he lied to an officer that he had a relation with Rebecca when he did have a relation with Rebecca. He said that he didn't, and in fact he did, and I don't know if Rebecca ratted him out or what happened there. We know Norman was trying to basically ruin Romero's reputation completely, so I think that's part of it as well, but just everything that Romero did, he has now got himself arrested, and I don't really know if Romero's going to come back from this, what's going to happen with that, if we're going to see him again next season, but I'm thinking from the looks of this episode that Romero is not just going to let this go. I think Romero's probably going to get out of jail. He's going to go after Norman. He's going to prove that Norman is the one that's in the wrong here and that Norman is crazy, which I don't think he'll ever be able to do because look at what happens in Psycho. Is there any point in that movie in the beginning where we think Norman Bates is off? I mean, there is no point there really. I mean, we do kind of think that when he starts to have that monologue, but when we first meet him in Psycho, there is no point where we're thinking he's off really until that shower scene is when we think he's off. That's really when we know that something is definitely going on here. So I really love the way that was done, and the rest of this episode is pretty much Norman all alone, which I love seeing, and I think really sets the tone for what next season is going to be, is Norman all by himself. We see Norman, he's not doing well with the acceptance of Norma's death, and he yells out that she can't just leave him here alone in the abyss where he can't find her, and this is where things get crazy. Now, we knew this had to happen because we know, of course, in the movie, Norman has Norma's corpse in his basement, locked in that closet, and we knew that was going to happen at some point, and exactly that's what happens here. He literally goes in the cemetery, digs up his mother, who looks beautiful. Even in death, she looks beautiful. I definitely will say that. And after getting her out of the coffin, he hugs her, kisses her, and even makes sure to cover the grave when he's done, which is crazy, but it really shows how good Norman is at this kind of stuff and how great of a serial killer really is, and also how sick and twisted he is, which we already knew how sick and twisted he is. But again, in this scene, he is thinking Norma is going to wake up. He keeps saying, "All right, mother, you can wake up now. The jig is up. Everything is over." He thinks that Norma is only doing this for show, and that in reality, she's really only doing this, for everyone but him, and that she is going to wake up. We know that she's not going to wake up, but that's the sad part of this, that Norman has this inkling and has this thought that Norma is going to wake up and that this is only temporary, which we know deep down that it's not. And Norman drives her home, a little taken aback when Norma doesn't respond to really anything and is acting dead because, she is dead. And we get this crazy scene where he puts her on the couch and demands she open her eyes because, of course, she's home now and they're safe. And he keeps saying, we're safe, everything's fine. But when he finally gets her eyes open, they're lifeless and glassy. And it's terrifying, honestly. That scene was terrifying. It freaks Norman out. I had no idea what was going to happen in this next scene. And then we see the moment is interrupted. Now, I thought this was going to be Romero saying, I'm out of jail and everything. But of course, I'm like, oh, Romero went to jail. Then I thought, okay, maybe it's Dylan. No, it's actually Chick, who you remember did have some sort of relation with Norma. They bonded over Caleb and how Chick would have killed Caleb, but Norma never told him to kill Caleb. So he comes by with food, offers condolences, and you see that Chick actually is a good man, and that's something I like seeing here, is that I think this season they kind of have developed Chick a little more. They've shown that he's not just, this henchman that works for Caleb, and he's not just this corrupted man. He's a lot more than that. He actually does care for Norma, and Norma really showed him the good he had in him, I think. A panicked Norman doesn't let him pass the front door, knowing that he has a lifeless corpse on the couch. I think Norman knows that it's lifeless, but again, he thinks she's gonna wake up, and Chick managed to get under his skin anyway by telling him that, he even says, you understand she's dead, right? Because he knows straight out that Norman does not want to admit that she's dead, and I love the way this was done. Definitely really good there. We see Norman does not understand that because he breaks down after Chick leaves, and Chick gives him this casserole, and I'm like, what are you going to do? Like, that second, I'm like, Chick is going to die. Chick is going to die. I was freaking out. I was really thinking that Norman was going to, take that casserole and, throw it on Chick or something. I mean, I was really freaking out, especially because knowing how sick Norman really is, and knowing the lengths that he's gone to protect Norma and everything he's really done. I mean, I really thought he was just going to kill him here. And out of options, he runs upstairs and he's thinking of killing himself. He literally, again, just like last week, he's thinking of killing himself because if Norma's dead, he's going to die. And then we see, I'm thinking that, so basically, he rushes to Norma's corpse. I'm thinking that there's going to be a fire because he knocks over the lamp, and I'm like, well, there's going to be a fire, right? I really thought he was going to set his house on fire. I mean, there are so many things going through my mind. I thought I was going to put the casserole on the floor. I didn't really know what he was going to do. But then we get to the ending, which I thought was perfect. I love the way this was done. We see he's distracted by the piano again, and this time he's relieved to find what he's hoping is there. It's not actually there. We know this isn't actually happening, but because of how unwell Norman is, he's thinking this is actually happening. Norma's sitting by the piano. She's not really sitting there. He's thinking she is, and she's playing I'll Be Home for Christmas on the piano. All these colored lights and a tree and this warm, happy house, and she's saying hi to him. She's saying she'd never leave him, and basically Norman hugs his mother. I'm like, that's how you keep Vera Farmiga on the show, because Norman is now having these visions that his mother's alive and well, and that shows how the Norma in Psycho becomes the Norman that we've known. Basically, now that this Norma is here, this is the Norma that's been in Norman's mind, the one that lets no one get close to her son, the one that tells him to kill. And I think it's very fitting that last season ended with him discovering that Norma personality, and then this season ends with him having that Norma personality right by him. And Norma says, Norman hugs his mother, because everything just seems great, and we see the Bates Motel logo fade out, and it's a fantastic ending. I love the way that was done, and that is how we end the season. Overall, guys, a very fitting season finale. I absolutely love this finale, but like I said, I really do think it's an introduction to where we're headed next season. Things really seem different for next season. We now have Romero out of the picture. He's in jail. I don't know if we're completely done with Romero. I think Romero might stay in jail. I don't know if I'm sure he's going to break out at some point, because it's clear that Romero's main goal is to kill Norman. I mean, at this point, I think he wants to kill him, because he knows that Norman is responsible, and Norman killed the woman he loved. Norman's got to die, definitely. So, definitely, I think that's going to happen. We know Norman's not actually going to die, but Romero, I still think, is in danger. I don't think this is the end of Romero. I think he is not going to stay in jail. I think he's going to get out eventually. How? I don't know, but definitely I think that's going to happen. As far as Dylan, I don't think this is the end of Dylan trying to contact Norman. I think he's going to try to contact Norman. The fact that he doesn't know that his own mother was killed, I don't know how Dylan's really going to react to that. I mean, is he going to find out how it happened? Is Norman going to try to cover it up? I'm not really sure. Again, there are two reasons why. Norman clearly wants to isolate himself from everyone. We can tell that very well. He pretty much just wants to be by himself and with no one else. I really did like the last scene with Chick, though, because it does show that Chick really does want to comfort Norman. He even says, look, I'm here to talk. If you need me, I'll be in town for a couple days. I mean, you can really see that he does want to help him, and I did really like seeing that. But what role does Norman play next season? What's really going to happen next season? I don't really know. I mean, my guess is as good as yours, guys. I don't know what happens next season. Next season seems like it's more Norman all by himself, which is what I thought was going to happen, considering the direction that it seemed like we were headed after last week's episode. I still thought that was going to happen. But again, we still have Vera Farmiga on the show. I don't know what role Dylan plays next season. I don't know what role Emma plays next season. I don't know what role Romero plays next season. Next season is definitely the final season, which I'm glad about, because I don't think the show could continue beyond next season, which I'm glad it is, but I think it's going to be a shorter season, because I don't really know what ends up happening, what's going to happen there. Also, the fact that Norman is alive because Romero was arrested is really interesting, because, of course, we knew Norman had to live because of what happened on Bates Motel and everything, and the fact that he's alive in Psycho. Obviously, Psycho can't happen if he's killed in Bates Motel. We knew that he wasn't going to die, obviously, but Romero's out to kill him, and Romero would have killed him if he would not have, because, again, I think Romero is above Norman at this point. He is on the same level as him. He is not weaker, and that's something I love, is that he is on the same level. It is not someone that Norman kills, and I think they've really handled that very well, because it seemed like Romero was dead set to be that man that's killed, because, of course, Norman Bates in the movie killed a man that was with his mother, and then he killed his mother, and then in this, we thought Romero was going to get killed, but actually, no, Norma gets killed, Romero doesn't get killed, and I think that's very interesting the way that that's going on. The way that Norman can just get everyone and fool everyone and make it seem like he's this innocent little kid, and that everyone, he's this innocent one, and that he doesn't really know what he's doing and things like that. No, Norman doesn't really know what he's doing, but I feel like he does know what he's doing. I feel like a part of him knows that he's not well, and that he does actually want people to have a good life, which is interesting, and it does show that Norman is still caring, but he's still very sick and very twisted, and I don't think he really realizes that. But guys, this without a doubt, I predicted going in the season this would be the best season of Bates Motel, and it did not change, because it exceeded my expectations. This is by far the best stuff we have ever had in Bates Motel, especially these last 3 episodes. They have been incredible. I have loved everything about these last 3 episodes. They have been amazing. I think they really have shown how great of an actor Freddie Highmore really is, because he's gone from, I remember when Freddie Highmore was initially casted, a lot of people were very, worried that he wasn't going to be as good, and I think he was even better than Anthony, not better, but I think just as good as Anthony Perkins ever was. I mean, he really was incredible. He really has been incredible in this show, and I can't wait to see how it is next season. Like I said, next season it clearly seems like it's going to be Norman and no one else, which I'm looking forward to seeing how that's going to be. But like I said, your guess is as good as mine as to what happens next season, because I don't know what happens next season. Norman's all by himself now. I don't really have a prediction, and that's why I don't really have much else to say. This was an amazing season. I loved everything about it. I think that this really was about as perfect as it could get. And I remember at the beginning of the season, I was a bit worried. I was like, are they rushing things? Is this really going to work? But as the season went on, it just got better and better, got crazier. Also, let's talk about Dr. Edwards, because Norman's not done with him. I mean, we saw last week Norm was with Dr. Edwards. Is that still going on? Is he going to get that therapy? I mean, he's not taking his meds now, so I don't think he's going to Dr. Edwards either, but the one person that Romero could have seeked out that he didn't was Dr. Edwards, because Dr. Edwards is the only one besides Romero that knows that Norman is not alright and knows that he has that Norman personality. Knowing that, I feel that's really going to end up not well for Norman. We'll have to see how that goes. I feel like he's still out to ruin Romero. Even though Romero's in jail, I feel like he's going to try to get maybe Romero killed. I'm not really sure. I mean, the lengths that Norman will go, I don't really know. I mean, I honestly think he could try to get Romero killed in jail. I don't know how he's going to do that, but the power he has over Romero is incredible. The way that, like I said, Romero is on that same level, and that's something that's just very interesting. I think they showed here is that Romero will always be on that same level. Norman will never be ahead of him, and I think that's something they showed really well here. We still don't know. Did Norman rat on Romero? Was it Rebecca that rat on him? We don't really know. Rebecca, I feel, is still in the show. I don't know what role she plays next season, but I feel like she's still involved. We'll have to see. But overall, guys, as you guys saw this season, I absolutely love this season. I thought this was a very fitting finale. Was it as good as the last week's episode? Yes, I do think it was as good. I still think last week's episode was probably the best episode of Bates Motel ever, just because Vera Farmiga and Freddie Highmore. I'm very happy that Vera Farmiga is still on the show. I knew she was still going to be, because of course we had to get to that Norma that we've seen. Obviously, this Norma that's not really there, that Norman thinks is there. And I think they did a very good job at showing that, like I said, Norman's not well. We've seen that very well here. But overall, guys, you guys saw this episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I cannot wait for next season, which is going to be the final season. I don't know what's going to happen next season, but this was a crazy season. So much happened, very eventful stuff, and very worthwhile as well. I will see you guys in the next video, though, which will be for the season, for the second half of the season of Jane the Virgin, because the season concludes tonight. I have a lot to say about that, obviously, but I probably won't get to that till tomorrow. No, I definitely won't get that till tomorrow, and I will see you guys for that. Of course, some of you guys saw this season. I have loved reviewing this season, maybe even more than last season. Like, I love last season, but this season I think was even better, and I will see you guys next week, which I said will be for Jane the Virgin, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.